ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਪਿਆਰਿਓ this commentary attempts to explain the position of logic within Sikh spirituality. The primary question is whether logic and reason have a place in Sikhi in general and within Gurbani in particular. Now, as we all know, Guru Nanak Sikhi was met with strong opposition from the spiritualities that existed at that time. Now, the most powerful opposition was accorded by those from the Brahmanical tradition. Now, they of course opposed the substance of Guru Nanak Sikhi, but they were equally upset with the method that Guru Nanak Ji had deployed. Now, on the issue of method, their opposition to Guru Nanak was based on two core points. First, that Guru Nanak had abandoned Sanskrit and instead used the language of the masses to preach his messages. Second, that Guru Nanak had incorporated logic, reason, and intellect within his spirituality. Now, both of these points are actually related because they are antitheses to the notion of blind faith. Why the Brahmin preferred Sanskrit was precisely because the ordinary human being could not understand it. The Brahmin interpreted the Sanskrit spiritual texts any way he wanted, and the masses were required to have unquestionable faith in those interpretations, no matter how skewed or twisted his translations. Now, why Guru Nanak used the language of the masses was because of two reasons. Number one, Guruji wanted the ordinary human being to be able to get Guru Nanak Ji's messages. Secondly, he wanted the ordinary man to be able to follow Guruji's logic and reasoning as well. So to do this, Guruji had to use the language that the masses understood clearly. Now, why the Brahmin was so upset with Guru Nanak Ji's use of logic, reason, and persuasive argument was because his ritual-based spirituality was crumbling. The Brahmin ritual and pakhanda could not stand a chance before Guru Nanak's powerful logic, before Guru Nanak Ji's convincing reasoning, and before Guru Nanak's extremely persuasive arguments. When, for instance, Guru Nanak refused to wear the sacred thread, the Janevu, he used logic and reason to state his stand. Now, Guruji would not wear it because his sister Nanaki was not allowed to wear it. So he argued very persuasively that he would not wear something that was denied to 1/2 or 50% of humanity, which was female. So he would also not wear it because it allowed people to announce one's caste or jat from the way one wore it. Guru Nanak's logic and reason was that he would not be part of a ritual that divided society or that was divisive of humanity as a whole. So taking his logic to the heights of reason and persuasion, Guru Nanak told a pandit of the kind of Janevu that ought to exist, Daya Kapa Santok Suta Jat Gandhi Satavata. So Guruji says, I prefer the Janevu made from the cotton of compassion, from the threads of contentment, and one that is knotted in morality with truth. E Janevu ji ka hai ta Pandey kat. So if you can Pandey, then weave this sort of Janevu for the soul and for the mind. Such a Janevu is for all of humanity. It will raise the spirituality of all humans, regardless of gender, creed, caste, into becoming one with humanity and becoming one with God. Such powerful logic, such elevated reasoning, and so convincing an argument. When Guru Nanak went to Hardwar, there was perhaps 1 million people throwing water towards the sun. They were engaged in a ritual of offering water to their departed ancestors. Guru Nanak Ji, as we all knew, threw water in the opposite direction. Now the Brahmin saw his ritual crumble to 1 billion pieces right in front of his eyes. So what caused his ritual to disintegrate? It was Guru Nanak's powerful logic. If water cannot reach my fields in Punjab, how can it reach the sun? It was a logic that shattered a 4,000-year-old ritual. Now, when Guru Nanak went to Jagannath and the devotees were performing Aarti, Guru Nanak's critique of this ritual was based on a very powerful logic and very potent reasoning. All Guruji told them was, Aarti of God cannot be performed and cannot be undertaken by mortals. A godly Aarti was already taking place. It was already happening. As we say in Punjabi, Paramatma di Aarti ਕੀਤੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੀ, ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੀ ਆਰਤੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ. Look up at the heavens, Gagan Mathal. Look into creation around you, Rav Chand Deepak Bane. Look into the laws of the universe, Taraka Mandal Jankamoti. You will see the wondrous arti that is happening. Kaisi arti hoy, kaisi shandar arti, kaisi bakamal, kaisi lajwab arti ho rahi hai. Meaning, what arti is taking place? What wonderful arti is taking place? The word kaisi in kaisi arti hoy is an expression of wonder. It is an exclamation of the arti that is taking place. Guruji tells us, become part of it. Now, this was powerful logic and reasoning that was able to move the mountain of arti ritual that had stood high and mighty for thousands of years. So everywhere Guru Nanak Ji went, every yogi, every mullah, every pandit he met, his way of winning them over from misguided paths into the true spiritual paths was through the use of logic, reason and persuasion. He told the yogi, now if you spend all your energies on prolonging life, how long do you think you can fight the forces of nature? How useful to humanity can you actually be sitting and hibernating in some cave up in the mountain, trying to live for an additional 100 years or more? So this was powerful logic. He told the mullah, if God was directional, then who is in charge of the directions where God is not in charge? Again, unassailable logic, yeah? So we find similar logic and reason and persuasion in the writings of our gurus, the Bhagats within the Gurbani of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. For instance, when Kabir Ji was faced with propositions that rituals would take one to God, he dealt with them with perfectly sound logic. When faced with the proposition that staying naked or staying nude was the way to God, he said, Nagana firta jo paya yoga, Banaka merga mokta sab hog. Meaning, if nudity was the way to God, then the animal kingdom ought to go there first. When faced with a Brahmin claim that shaving bald was the way to God, he said, Mond manaye jo siddh pai, mukti ped na gaya kai. The sheep was regularly shaved bald, so it should reach God first. When faced with Bihangam or Brahmachari claim that celibacy was the way to God, he says, Bendarakh jo tariye pai, khusre kyo na paramagat pai. Then the transvestite should get to go to God first. Now, after heaping logic upon logic and reason upon reason, Kabir Ji finally gives his conclusion. Kaho Kabir suno narpai, Ram naam bin mukta kenapai. So, similarly, yeah, when Bhagat Ravdas Ji was faced with criticism relating to his Kopala caste, that he could never realize God, the pure God, because his caste was defiled, his answer was fantastic. He said, Sura pavitra nat avar jalare sursari milat na hoyanam. Sura is liquor, defiled drink, and sursari is Ganges, the pure Ganges. So he's saying, Sura pavitra, if you emptied a bottle of defiled liquor into the pure Ganges, the pure Ganges does not get defiled. In fact, the liquor loses its defiled nature and gets purified within the Ganges. Meaning, I may be defiled in your eyes, but God is pure, and whosoever merges with the pure God becomes pure. Pyaro, it may be hard to match the quality and depth of such logic, yeah? Now, the question that remains is this. Then, where does faith or where does Shraddha stand in Sikhi or in Gurmat or in the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji? Now, the Shraddha of Sikhi and the Shraddha of Gurbani is what we say in Punjabi, Gyan Adart Shraddha, or in English, enlightened faith, or faith based on knowing, faith based on enlightenment. It is the antonym or the opposite of blind faith. We can say that knowing and faith, or Gyan and Shraddha, are the two pillars of Sikhi. One could say that Sikhi is 50% Gyan and 50% Shraddha, 50% knowing, 50% believing. But the defining characteristic of enlightened faith is that the order is set in the Guru Granth Sahib. Knowing comes first. Sikhi believing is after knowing. Believing without knowing is defined as blind faith. Now the verse in particular is Keh Kabir ab janya, jab janya tau man manya. Kabir, I now know. I am now enlightened. Now that I know, Jab janya tau man manya, now that I know, I believe, I accept. Then he goes on to state the value of such enlightened faith as opposed to blind faith. He says, Man mane log na patija to kya kija. So with such faith, meaning enlightened faith, I do not have to be concerned about pleasing or convincing people around me. In other words, enlightened faith is grounded in knowing. It is not grounded in acceptance by people around us. Blind faith, on the other hand, is always people dependent. Blind faith people believe what others tell them to believe. They stop believing something when other people stop believing, and they start to believe it again when other people start to believe it again. Now, Pyare, I want to conclude by making four pertinent brief points about Gurbani in particular. Firstly, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj presents spiritual knowledge in the form of reasoning, which is based on sound logic and very persuasive argument. Gurbani is, in essence, a convincing argument relating to spiritual elevation. In fact, the entire Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, from Ek Onkar right down to Mandavani, is a long, persuasive and logical discourse to answer the question, Kev Satyara Hoye, Kev Kura Tute Pal, that is raised on page 1 of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj. Second, the Guru Granth Sahib is a reasoned and logical argument against two prevalent methods of spiritual practice that are rejected, namely ritual and blind faith. Thirdly, a Shabda-based journey of spiritual discovery is entirely practical for spiritual seekers of modern times in which we live. Now, this is because the ingredients of the Shabad, primarily Gyan Adarth Shraddha or enlightenment-inspired faith, or Shraddha Tetikiya Gyan, or faith generated by enlightenment, which is the Shabada, all of these are congruent and in line with the primary values adopted by modern society and modern mankind. And these values are logic-based and argument-derived reason. Fourth, the Shabad is by definition logical reasoning. Now this is so because the Guru Granth Sahib is not a book or historical or a mythological narration. It is not a ritual manual either. Yeah? The Shabad reasons for man to undertake a journey of spirituality with his Creator. The Shabad persuades man to walk the path of spirituality. This reasoning and the persuasion is very much dependent on sound and clear logic. Pol Chok Dikhe Mahabakshani, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.